Here at This Won't Fix You, I talk about interesting, sometimes beautiful ways of looking at life in all its messy glory. I'm your host, Nadine Pittham, and I'm an accredited psychotherapist working in Manchester. When you listen to this podcast, you will benefit from some of the best thought-provoking gems I encounter in my work. I may be sharing something in the form of a snippet of theory, or it might be an idea or metaphor that has emerged from the conversations I have with the wonderful people I see in my consulting room. It is my hope that what I share here will give you an interesting perspective on some of life's challenges. Hello everybody, we're talking about loss and death today, and I'm joined by Tanya Hirschman. Tanya is a queer writer of odd things, a poet, writer, teacher and editor based in Manchester. She's the author of 9 books. Her debut novel, Go On, a fictional memoir in collage, was partly inspired by being writer-in-residence in Manchester's Southern Cemetery. Her second poetry collection, Still Life with Octopus, was published in July 2022. She's the editor of the charity anthology Fuel, which contains 75 prize-winning flash fictions, and the book raises funds to fight fuel poverty. Tanya's just finished a novel set in an alternative version of our society where moving through the world alone is the norm, where solitude is celebrated and nurtured, and couples are viewed with great suspicion. I could go on because Tanya has written and contributed so much, but I have to stop somewhere. You can visit her website to find out more, tanyahirschman.com. So Tanya, welcome. Hello.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to listen to all of that.
Well, there's a lot more, but we do have to keep it a little tight.
It's quite ironic because what I actually write are very, very short things, but then the bio gets longer and longer.
Could you publish your bio one day?
Some people have, yeah. I mean, not mine.
Right.
Yeah, anyway, that's a tangent, but yeah.
Maybe we'll get a few of those. So, as I say, this episode we're talking about loss, about grief, because not all loss is grief. So while we will be talking about death, we're not exclusively talking about death. So we might be talking about other losses such as separation or estrangement, intentional or otherwise. I'm just wondering if you have anything to say about that.
I just think, well, I guess because I'm a word person, I've been mulling over in preparation for this, just the word loss, and that you can pair it with lost and found, but you can also pair it with loss, losing and winning. So I've been thinking about all these different ways to come at it and what grief might be. But I'm very intrigued by the idea of loss as a sense of, do we have to have had the thing to have lost it as well? And what does having a thing mean before the loss occurs?
You're talking about change in there as well then. So if we lose something and then find something, then there's a change, isn't there?
Yeah, or can we... I mean, I was thinking loss in terms of death is a very specific kind of loss, because then there's never any prospect of re-finding or regaining the thing that has been lost. But other kinds of loss have, I guess, other kinds of potential and possibilities within them. Have I gone a bit esoteric?
No, tell me.
I don't know. Well, I was thinking the only death-related loss that I've experienced is the death of my cat, which was a huge thing for me, and this was about 10 years ago. And I think he was 13, and that shook me for an entire year, and I'd never experienced grief like that before. And I did spend a long time. It really was a fascinating process, because when he died, he was a very adventurous cat. So by the time he died, he only had one eye. Wow. And bits of him were just not working very well. So I did spend a lot of the year thinking, well, where's he gone for a start? How has he just gone? And what was he if he clearly wasn't his eye, because he'd lost an eye, so he clearly wasn't in his eye. And I spent a long time thinking, well, what was he before that what has now gone? Yes, I'm not sure what I want more to say about that.
There's something about the soul then, about the soul having gone, and there's something about the impact of that soul on you. Yeah. And so your soul is different because that soul is not impacting you anymore. I've
been thinking about that as well. I think I had not expected to feel such a wave of grief for a pet, but he was so much more than that. He was like my best friend, this cat, and I'm still getting tearful about it now, and it's 10 years ago. But yeah, there's that idea with grief that it's not just the loss of this other entity, it's the loss of the relationship between you and that entity, and what maybe could only happen between you and that other creature that has also been lost. I was thinking about that as I was coming here. that uniqueness in the space between you and the other creature. And maybe even in some ways more so with a pet who sometimes is such a physical connection as well, like the way he would lie on my chest and scratch everyone else except me, which I really liked.
You were special.
Yes, I was the one who didn't attack, which is very special. He was like my bodyguard, really.
And no other cat would behave in the same way that he did.
No.
And it's you said the word uniqueness. I think that's something I'd thought about as well. The idea that it is the way that person or that, like you used the word creature, which I thought was really lovely. Whatever that soul, however that interacts with us, that is unique to that person. And so we lose that relational connection when somebody goes.
And we lose the future potential of it. And I think as well, because other losses I've had have been at the ending of close friendships. And that's also a form of, I might think, it still could be possible. But deep down, I think, no, that very special, whatever happened in that space between me and the other person, that's gone, that's ended, that's a thing to grieve as well, that uniqueness. And perhaps it's never the same with another person.
No, so how is part of, certainly from a psychotherapy perspective, it is important that we hold something, the continuing bonds that we used to have with that person or that creature, that we carry those forward in a new way. We have to find a new way of relating to what was.
Yeah.
We can come later to when you said, do we have to have even had it to have lost it in the first place?
Yeah, what does having a thing mean? Is there an ownership angle to it? But that's maybe just a bit more semantic of what the word lose or loss means. But yeah, carrying it forward. I think it's different if it's a loss. Well, I'm imagining, because there's this one close friendship, the ending of which I'm still dealing with, and that only really happened in the last few years. And it's very tempting to try to rewrite the story of the entire friendship based on the fact that it didn't end well, rather than celebrating the preciousness of the wonderful parts of it. And there were so many wonderful parts of it. And maybe that's part of the grief, properly grieving. There's not such an acceptance in our society, is there, of grieving the end of a friendship, the death of a friendship.
Yeah, we don't have that language for that.
We don't have that.
And there's Annie DeFranco, I don't know whether you listen to Annie DeFranco, she says, what happened always adjusts to fit what happened after that. And so everything is then tilted through that lens. So how do you keep the relationship pure if it ended badly?
Yeah.
Or if you lost somebody through traumatic circumstances, like violent deaths or a violent ending of any kind, how does that change the way that you see that person? Because it's always through that filter, through that lens. Through
the lens of the ending. Yeah, I have a friend going through that right now where she just lost two good friends in a very, very violent way. And there's no way it's not going to impact right now. But I didn't know what to say or how. I just was encouraging her to tell me a bit about them and her friendship with them and some of the good times.
I have experienced loss. My mum died when I was 9, and if somebody asks me something about her, even though it was 37 years ago, then it's still, I could very rarely answer it because I was so young, but it just means somebody realises and recognises that person had an impact, that person's dying had an impact. So I think that's a really beautiful thing to offer somebody. Tell me about this person, because it's not like they're going to forget about them for a second while they're in this, especially in the raw stages of grief. You're not bringing something up for them that, oh my God, they're just about managing to keep down.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know how close they were either. And so I guess I was asking about the whole entirety of their friendship rather than just this terrible moment.
But you're showing you're not afraid of it in that moment, aren't you?
I think that's important as well. There's so much of that in our society, isn't there, of fear of saying the word dying. And I did read that recently where somebody used the word passing. And I thought, that seems such a euphemism. Why are we still doing that? What's so terrifying about death and dying?
Because it destroys us, like pulls us limb from limb, perhaps. And it is one of the 4 givens of human existence, one of the 4 things that we fear most.
What are the other 3?
Freedom. We are freer than we can possibly bear.
That's not Annie DeFranco, is it?
That's not.
Nietzsche or something,
It's Irvin Yalom, for anybody who's interested.
I do like Irvin Yalom.
You like a bit of Irvin Yalom. So death, freedom, we're all alone, and life is meaningless.
Oh.
So they're cheery. They're a cheery quartet.
Well, I'm quite up for all 4 of those. So if I don't have those fears, then, that does take off a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Love being alone. Really happy with the meaning stuff. Freedom's great. I've spent many years in therapy. I just mentioned that it didn't come naturally. But death, for me, death is unique because it's the most fascinating mystery that we can ever face. I've been to a lot of events about death, and there was one philosopher who said something like, death is the one experience that we will have where we know that we won't be able to look back on it afterwards. And I thought, that's really interesting.
It's really obvious, but actually, I'd never thought about it like that.
And you certainly, they do weird stuff in their heads. Yeah.
And you can't share it with anybody either, so we can never pass that on.
Unless we believe that there is some afterlife.
And can I ask, do you?
I think so. I want to say, though, first, to go back to your point about it tears us limb from limb, that I want to acknowledge that I've never had that experience. So that your experience it's really different from mine, and I understand that I can't speak to that experience personally. And the experience I had with my cat was a deep grief, but it wasn't that sort of experience. And maybe in some ways I've been fortunate that I've got to the age of 53 and I haven't experienced that. What were we saying?
I have absolutely no idea.
Did we leave that then? Death, can't look back on it afterwards. No. Where were we?
Well, maybe now would be a good time to introduce the metaphor before we get completely
yes.
drawn into something.
Maybe we'll remember it again at some point.
Okay, so the idea is that when somebody we love dies or disappears and we lose them, we lose the full cake of a person. The cake tin that encased that person within us then kind of empties, so we've then got this cavern inside us. And a bit like the counters are, I like to picture it as the counters at the start of a Trivial Pursuit game. So you've got this little kind of, some families call them pies, cheeses, cakes. Let's go with cake. But you end up with then kind of an empty Trivial Pursuit counter that represents kind of the emptiness that person has just left you with. And the size of the emptiness correlates with the size of the loss, I suppose. And one of the 4 tasks of mourning is to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. So it's that kind of straddling of what has gone and how I now move forward. What am I going to do to kind of...
where does the 4 tasks of mourning come from?
Somebody clever?
Is it Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?
No, it's not her.
Right,
no, she did the stages of grief, didn't she? Which
apparently were misinterpreted or something.
Yeah, they're not linear. They're not linear, and a lot of people think they're linear, and they're not. Now you see that's something I probably should mention. Maybe I'll dig that out and put it in the show notes at the end so that people can find out where that is. So we could see this finding meaning as embarking on life in a way that we have to try and find ways to refill our little cake tin.
Yeah.
And so...
And so the cake tin is in us? Are you imagining that as the metaphor?
Yeah. And maybe more
we have
people
lots
die.
Of
we have like cogs kind
of
all through our system, our torso, whatever.
Yeah.
And so constantly life is a pursuit of making ourselves whole. It's a constant pursuit of wholeness. And so we're cobbling together different wedges. So I clearly remember, it's quite a crystal memory now, even as a teenager. So my mum had died and definitely felt that loss of mum. And I didn't really know that's what it was, but whenever I went to one of my friends' parties, everybody was downstairs doing God knows what. I would always find out where mum was, and I'd go and sit on the end of her bed. And
with her? Or
with mum.
She
was there. I wasn't just kind of creepily
laying
on the bed. But I'd just have a conversation for a couple of hours, an hour or two.
Because you missed the mumness.
Because at the time, I don't think I even knew that I missed it. It was just, why would I do anything other than this? It just felt like an absolute... It wasn't even a decision, really. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And that actually really speaks to me because my parents are alive, but I have a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I spent a lot of my childhood hanging out with my friends' mothers. And I loved my friends' mothers. And I'm trying to write a poem about it. I haven't got very far, and it could take years, but it's something like, I left my mother for other mothers. Did she know? And I haven't got much further than that. So I'm wondering if I was also... Other people's mothers were so important to me.
Did they know? The other people's mothers?
Yeah, they knew. I got the sense that they definitely knew that there was something I needed that I wasn't getting in my own home.
And they gave generously?
They were very special. Probably more special to me than my friends, yeah.
So
So
they were a vehicle to get to the mum.
Maybe. There was a lot of that. And some of my exes, I really liked their families much more than I liked them. I feel like I can say that now publicly. But yeah.
That's another kind of loss though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you didn't lose your mum, but actually
there wasn't
you didn't have one.
There. In the first place.
So this metaphor certainly works for you in that sort of searching for something.
Yeah, had the empty cake tin.
Mm.
Yeah. Did you know what was going on while your mum was dying?
No.
No,
so it was kept from me. Yeah.
That sounds like to me there's been a shift in terms of how maybe children are being allowed more. But I guess it depends on the family of who's told what at the time. But that sounds even more traumatic.
There's a disenfranchisement that takes place then, isn't there? That I didn't go to the funeral, was packaged off to school on the day of the funeral. Was utterly disenfranchised. And I think it's interesting that I'm also a funeral celebrant now. So, this notion of I need to get to funerals. There's something there that needs filling. I need to know what funerals are like because then I can piece together.
And they thought they were sparing you in some way or
something? Yeah. And what they were doing was excluding me. But, and it was the 80s.
Not giving you an outlet.
Mm. Yeah. So we end up with, like you will have done then, from your teenage friends' mothers, you end up with a kind of cobbled together, like lumpy scar tissue sort of.
It's interesting because I thought when reading about your metaphor when you sent it to me in advance, I thought, oh, this doesn't really speak to me, but actually it does. Yeah, little bits from other people's mothers. Mm-hmm. Well, I might use that in my poem. Can I do that?
You absolutely can. Know. It's not my metaphor. Well, it is, but it's...
Yeah, I've cobbled it together. It makes me think as well, and maybe this was what I wanted to say before, but when I was writer in residence in the Southern Cemetery, I love cemeteries. I've always been drawn to cemeteries, and I have found... I was writer in residence for about 1.5 years, and when the world is divided into the people who, when you tell them you're writer in residence in a cemetery, they start backing away slowly, and they're like, okay. And the other people who are like, oh, tell me more. But on my first day as writer in residence, and I should say this was something I invented myself, and I just went and asked them if I could go and hang out in the cemetery. I didn't really know why, but it's the second biggest cemetery in Europe, and it's up the road from my house, and it's just phenomenal. I went to 4 funerals on that first day. I just hung out with I really wanted to hang out with the people who worked in the cemetery to find out what it was that they did as a day job. Mm-hmm. And so that first day I went to 4 funerals, and I felt like that was a bit of a funeral immersion. I don't know what I was looking for either.
What did you find?
It's very different, like behind the scenes. It's like peeking behind the curtain and like listening to all the what do you call them? The mostly men, I imagine, who are like the
pallbearers.
Is it the pallbearers? They all stand in a certain way with their hands behind their back. So I was looking for little details I thought I might use in poems or something like that. So I was watching and keeping an eye. But the people who worked in the cemetery were the most wonderful people, and they laughed more than any other group of people I've ever been around, but they took their job so seriously and they really cared.
And deeply respectful, that's what I found.
Oh my God. And it was their life's work. They'd all been there for like 25 years. And the grave diggers as well, they were just phenomenal. They'd wanted to be a grave digger since this guy was 14, and I was trying to talk about Shakespeare and they thought I was a bit mad. But I was not expecting that. But taking it very, very seriously. But in terms of maybe grief and trying to piece something together afterwards, they told me about several people they knew who would come and visit their loved one's grave every single day for years and years, sometimes twice a day. And this just went on, and they would see these people coming and going constantly, and we would sort of talk about, well, who is the grieving for, and what does it mean that they keep coming and coming to the grave? I guess it does something for them, perhaps.
I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about the relationships, that you're still having a relationship with that person. If you're still going to see them, they're still with you. So I'm wondering, is there a piece in the cake tin, or have you got a stale piece that you're kind of trying to keep in there? Because you might from the outset think, that sounds quite destructive. Are they getting on with their own life if they're going to visit this grave twice a day, every day for years? But who are we to say what works and how the relationship was with the particular person that they've lost? Just people trying to find a way.
Something.
People trying to...
Yeah. And my way, it turned out, was I ended up, there are sections in my novel, and basically I go into the cemetery and I talk to the dead people, but like all of them as a kind of en masse. So I'm walking through the cemetery chatting, and I really like that. That's what we were talking about, afterlife. We touched on that and I went in a different direction. But I guess in some ways I do really sense when I'm in cemeteries, I sense that I can talk to them and I don't know if I'm doing this as a writer, or I can't really separate me as a writer from me as a human. But I like the idea that the dead are intrigued by me wandering through the cemetery when I'm not there because someone has died. So this is how my imagination works. So I'm imagining.
And
all
like the
sorts
idea
of
of
things.
them watching you,
Yeah.
of them having a perspective on you wandering around.
Yeah.
Because we think there's something egotistical about being the living, isn't there?
Yes.
But actually they're the ones kind of fertilising the soil. They're the ones that are...
And they're on different levels as well. Some of them are under, some of them are above. And I really developed friendships with several of them. It's in my book. It sounds mad when you say it out loud. But when you're like a writer or a poet, you're kind of allowed to do
stories.
these things. Yeah, it's all stories. And who's to say that they're not there?
What do you mean? That what?
The spirits, the dead. Who's to say they're not watching me?
Yeah.
No, we can't.
We absolutely don't.
No. I love that.
Let's go back to the cake tins, actually,
Yeah.
because, again, from a therapeutic perspective, we have to acknowledge the thing that's missing in order to deal with it, in order to bring about change. And so if we have an empty Trivial Pursuit counter, if we don't acknowledge that we are empty and we're trying to kind of brusquely carry on, then what we're not doing is acknowledging where we are.
Yeah.
So we're trying to imagine or pretend we're somewhere else. And I think it's only when we kind of face it and sit in it. And maybe that's one of the things that we're frightened of about death, is actually facing it, because then we have a task to do. Then we have to then go out and we have to search for that part of us to be met by somebody else, by other relationships.
Which speaks to me in that not just to do with death, to do with all sorts of losses. And also that what I was saying at the beginning is, can you only have lost something if you had it? But then there's also the idea of the lack of the thing you never had. And that maybe you're trying to fill as well. I've been thinking about that a lot recently. Do you know other societies that are better than this? I do sense that other places, like Mexico and the Day of the Dead, for example, I sense that other countries might be better at this.
Yeah, I don't know enough about other cultures. I've heard anecdotally about different ways of grieving.
The Irish wake, for example.
Yeah.
That sounds wild. I've never been to one of those.
Well, and the dressing of the dead. We give our dead
Yes.
to somebody else, don't we?
Yeah.
We don't tend our own dead.
That's a really good point. I judged a short story competition a couple of years ago. There were 5 of us judging, and we awarded first prize to this beautiful story, which was about a young Muslim man. I think it was a young Muslim man washing the body of his father. And it was so stunning. And it isn't something you read about often. Or
Is it a privilege? Is it considered a privilege? Was that kind of...
I think so. Or I think it's just a duty, and maybe a privilege as well. I'm not sure, but it's a ritual. There are rituals like that in Judaism as well. There's all sorts of... The rituals seem very helpful. I'm not a big fan of organised religion, but I can understand that in times like death, I only really know the Jewish ritual. To have it tells you what you should do for the first 7 days, what you should do for the first 30 days, what you should do or can't do for the first year. So it
guidance
fills up your time, and gives you an out as well. If there's something you don't feel like doing, then you're allowed to say, well, I just can't.
What do you mean you can't?
So in Judaism, you're not supposed to go to weddings or other celabrations within the first year. So it's like it gives you an out. You say, no,
You
I
said
can't
that with
possibly.
a smile on your face.
I'm not a big fan of weddings. Did I say that? Damn, you're a therapist. I'm always looking for an out to not go to large, where there's like large masses of people. So it gives you a way to say, it gives you language to say, I can't go now because I'm in mourning. So it gives you that structure. So I've heard that is really useful.
Could you go?
It might be frowned upon, but it totally depends on what your community is.
I think this question of ritual is an interesting one. There's a man called Francis Weller who's written a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and he uses the word feral, that grief is feral, and it's not contained, it's not easy to manage, and actually a ritual offers a container for the wildness of it. And he talks a lot about ritual. I
like that very much. The wild edge of sorrow, and feral is a great word. Yeah, I did, when I was grieving for my cat, it did feel like it would just come upon me, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on.
It takes hold, doesn't it? It is in charge.
I wanted to mention here, I mean, it's so interesting to think about what might be going on in the brain and the body during all this grieving process. And that this neuroscience podcast that I listened to, I think he did it's called the Huberman Lab. He did a whole episode on grief. And he said that they found these cells called trace cells, whose sole function, it seems, in the brain is to notice when something that has always been there is no longer there. And I'm just absolutely fascinated by that. To think that our brain has that function of noticing the lack of something that was present.
And then what does it do? I imagine that's where pain comes.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Then we have to
I don't know if we know what it does.
Seek to...
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what's the point of these trace cells?
I know, exactly. There's so much we don't know about the brain and the nervous system. I know, I don't know what the point of them is. But it made me think, here's a metaphor for you, which is not cake tins. I used to live in a house with 4 flats in it. And I had quite a small entrance hall. And at one point I came home to find that one of my neighbours had put their sofa in the entrance hall, standing up. Presumably because at some point they were giving it away or someone was coming to pick it up. But it ended up in the entrance hall for weeks. And I would navigate round it. And then it was gone. And I couldn't not see the sofa-shaped hole that was there. And I was so aware of... I've tried to write a poem about this as well. So aware of the hole, the shape, the hole that it had left of this particular shape. And it took weeks to get used to the fact that the sofa was not there anymore.
And the sofa
that's just
doesn't I was going to say, it doesn't relate to you, does it? And
no.
There is a person
who
notices us, who witnesses our day-to-day. Like I'm thinking about if a partner dies. Yeah. Or if we have a relationship severing, then what you lose is all the intricate ways that person has interacted with you.
I mean, it might be the sofa had triggered like 2 trace cells, whereas a human being might trigger thousands of them. I mean, I'm making this up now, but...
That's a fascinating concept, that the brain actually has a part dedicated to... And there is, again, there's research that shows that the pain that we feel on grief is a physical pain. I'm putting my hand to my stomach even as I'm talking. I can sense that kind of doubled over feeling that you get when you're in the throes of it.
But all pain has emotional and psychological aspects as well.
What you mean, the overlap?
There's never just... I've been thinking about that a lot recently as well, about the psychology of pain. So it makes sense that it manifests physically as well as everything.
And is it different because it's not linear, whereas physical pain is a linear process on the whole, but like physical healing, but grief doesn't seem to be. It seems to be absolutely
which is really interesting. My background is in maths and physics, and are we overly interested in the linear and how much is not really linear? We can now go into the quantum physics, which is very not linear.
So we're trying to attribute meaning. We're trying to attribute.
Maybe we're trying to be rational,
neaten things up. Whereas actually, grief, being feral, can't be neatened up, and so.
Or the equations that might describe grief are so complex, and there's so much interplay. There's just too many variables, so that we can't. Maybe it is in its own way rational, but we can't. We don't know what the system is, and we can't figure it out. Maybe especially we can't figure it out when we're in it.
Now, go figure this. So I remember being in my early 20s. So my mum had been dead now 13 years by this point, maybe 14 years. So she died when I was 9, so I'd never really spoken to her on the phone because I will have been a child. So none of that will have happened. And something had happened. I was in a temping job. I was on a reception in a company that in Bath. Something, though, significant had happened that day. I can't remember what it was. And I remember having this surge, a fully grown thought, like ticker tape across my head that said, I'll phone my mum and tell her about it. Like, wow. How does that come from? And it arrived fully formed as an idea in my head.
That sounds like a real example of you preserving and nurturing a relationship with your mother after she died, and you updated it into your adult phone state. Am I therapizing you now?
No, that's interesting. Maybe.
You'd added in the aspect.
Nobody has ever given me a kind of explanation that I can put a hook into. That feels...
So you'd matured your relationship with your mother, no matter that she wasn't physically present, and you'd added in the aspect of talking to her on the phone because it's a thing you did now.
That's fascinating, because I didn't think I had a relationship with her. But obviously I do.
If you wanted to speak to her on the phone.
Obviously I do, or did, and no doubt.
That's really powerful. Has that happened since? No. So I guess maybe you caught yourself and thought, well, that's clearly not possible, or something.
But normally my brain, I don't think people's brains respond to logic particularly.
Do you know about that? Is it in Japan? It's this phone box they've set up that people can phone the dead.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a beautiful This American Life podcast about it, or it could be Radio Lab. And I've forgotten it. Someone set it up I think it was after the tsunami. And someone set it up in their garden or something and just allowed the local community to come, and a person could come and phone their dead loved one. I don't know much more about it.
Whether there was a voice on the other end of the phone?
I don't know if there was. It was just like a tool for maybe trying to process
space,
grief.
allowing. And is that actually a big chunk of it? That actually...
Yeah.
I feel like we're sort of drifting into the final section about therapy, but I think that's what a therapist does. A therapist will provide a legitimate space where you can go and go, right, okay, for this hour in this week, I'm going to allow myself.
Yeah.
And maybe the phone does that.
Yeah, it sounded like it had a transformative effect for people. I can't remember much more about it than that. I know.
Gosh, I imagine that exploded. Not the phone.
Not the literally exploded.
But the idea of that.
Yeah.
So is there an assumption maybe when we don't talk about our own grief, is there an assumption that other people are full, that other people are not feeling what we're feeling and we can't bring other people down, that this thing I'm carrying is too big?
Yeah. Well, this is something I see because I volunteer for the Samaritans, and we see this so often. So many people saying, I don't want to burden anyone else. And I often wish if they only knew that everyone felt like that, and maybe we could slightly burden each other, but it will just let go of the word burden.
Well, how does it feel when we are, in inverted commas, burdened by a friend? We actually feel it's a privilege.
We do
generally like that.
Yeah. We're not really allowed to say that to people as Samaritans. Have you ever thought, everyone else also feels this way? So, you could try burdening someone. Yeah, no, we're not supposed to say that. But we can gently suggest that maybe there'd be one person that they could share even a small amount of it with.
Well, certainly in therapy, you can. We don't offer advice, but we can draw attention to that. Ask those questions about what's it like. Is it only you that's not allowed to burden other people, or is nobody allowed to burden? And actually think about relationships that you've had that have deepened over time. What is it that has deepened them? What takes the relationship deeper? And it is generally a sharing of vulnerability.
It is, even though, and maybe we're going off topic, I have found in my own experience, I have thought that a deepening of intimacy with other people necessarily had to involve sharing more and becoming more vulnerable, but have had several friendships end because I think that maybe I encouraged too much of that and people perhaps felt too vulnerable and then backed off. I don't know if that's happened because then they didn't talk to me about it.
When you say you encouraged it, but there is a responsibility on behalf of the person sharing it.
Yeah.
So you enjoy that?
I really enjoy that, and I really like talking on a deep level. And I will really talk about anything these days, but not everyone feels that way. And maybe also, I don't know, I'm fascinated by friendship and connection between people and intimacy, and that maybe it can come in other ways as well. But I think it can be quite risky. I'm understanding it can be risky, since I'm not a professional as well, encouraging people to perhaps open up and make themselves vulnerable, and then maybe I've just left them like that. Do you know what I mean?
Left them how?
That left them in a feeling vulnerable.
How do you leave them?
I don't know. Yeah,
because that suggests that you kind of walk away and go yes, or
some sort of I think this is my own. I don't know.
I wonder if there's something that has to be the two-way nature of it. I'm thinking back to. I'm really struck by that memory that you shared earlier about going to see your friends' mums.
Yeah.
That you said they probably knew. You think they knew.
I think they knew.
And so they will have felt like that was a gift to you. They will have felt like there was something reciprocal about that. It wasn't just that you were taking, you weren't burdening them or demanding anything from them. There will have been something sort of generous about the way that they related to you. I feel like as adults, in these relationships that you're talking about, are they not the same, that we each have a responsibility?
But no, you're totally right. It's the other person's choice as well, how much they chose to share with me. I think I'm trying to understand human nature. I think that's what I'm constantly trying to do it. And also there's this big rational side to me, the one that studied maths and physics, is I want the algorithm to explain humans, and there is no such thing, which the writer part of me really totally understands. So I'm trying to reconcile it and trying to explain things. I also like watching a lot of crime drama on TV, which is so satisfying because things get solved. And then I recently realised that I was probably trying to do that in life and it doesn't work.
I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah.
I think we're all trying to understand. We're all trying to move towards wholeness, healing.
And predictability, which is just not possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which the brain gets us into all sorts of problems with.
Fascinatingly, yeah. You have to try and stop the brain. I like breaking habits just to try and mess with my head, to stop the brain trying to predict that things will be like as they have been.
Like the sofa in the hall.
Exactly. Where is the sofa?
And is this, I think this
Which
is a risk
wasn't
when...
great either. It wasn't great that the sofa was in the hall. I would
No,
like the sofa
yeah, quite
to
pleased
have
that it had gone.
Exactly. So a whole other topic is what do you do with loss when you're actually you didn't have a good relationship,
when it's celebratory,
or just neutral even as well. But there's still the loss, isn't there?
Because
what do you do with that?
That person was there and that person is not there.
Yeah, and maybe the person was damaging and that's not there, but that still has happened.
The brain is trying to predict and trying to control and know and understand. Then when somebody dies, might we then not open ourselves to love? Who was it? Somebody very important and very beautiful. Terry Tempest Williams, I've got it written down here. Grief dares us to love once more. Because we could get lost. We could just go, well, I'm not doing that again because this hurts too much. Yeah. Like, did you get another cat?
It took me a year.
Yeah.
And I noticed as well that not only did it take me a year to get another cat, for the first year that she was a rescue cat, so she was already also wary. For the first year, I didn't really let myself get attached to her. So it took us both a long, long time.
So it is a dare. It's a risk once we've lost.
Yeah.
To launch back
into
love.
And I still think that I still think I haven't allowed myself to feel what I felt for my previous cat, for this cat. She's so sweet. But she's lovely company, but I feel like I'm not going to do that again. Yeah.
And do we do that with people?
Yeah, I don't know.
And so does that mean,
yes.
oh God, so the more people we love and lose, then does our fabric get thinner?
Do the trace cells become more powerful if there's been more loss? Yeah, this is very interesting.
Or do they give up?
Or do they're like, I can't handle all this.
Yeah, there's too many.
Here, it's gone.
My computer's overloaded.
Yeah. We are only part computer, aren't we?
I'm reading a book called Home by Claire Diamond at the moment. It's not fiction, but she talks about the kind of that we are basically all a result of. We're all a result of the relationships and conversations that we've had in the past. So everything that we are is an impulse based on programming. And actually we have very little free will. We have very little choice. And we think we do because it makes us, it inflates the self.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it's quite a Buddhist sort of perspective. But actually we are just the resulting output of programming.
That makes a lot of sense, although I would argue with the word just, because it's still an amazing, enormous thing that's what we are. Uh-huh. How could we be anything else? I think free will, it's like what I was saying, that if we had all the variables and could program in every single variable, like every conversation we ever had, we would be able to predict what I would do in the next 5 minutes. In that way, we don't have free will. But we will never be able to do that. I am a product of my...
And is any of it filtered through the uniqueness that is you?
Yes. Well,
so do we have a soul?
No one else has lived my life.
I think there's something about our society that is very, very good at containing the extreme emotions of a child. Maybe not extreme, but like child falls over, grazes their knee. Mum, perhaps mostly, comes up, oh, baby, come here, scoops up child, and we contain and contain and contain. Yeah. The knee heals, we move on.
Yeah.
As we get older, our grazed knee becomes more complex. Everything becomes more complex. The feelings that we suffer from become more complex. And the adults in our life become less and less able to contain that until we become adults ourselves, and then we're all then just in a maelstrom of a fucking mess of really complex emotions that actually, as a society, we don't contain at all. Very well.
From what I see, we're doing a worse and worse job of helping people and trying to contain. Yeah. Our vantage point from the Samaritans, it doesn't look like we're getting any better at this. Mm-hmm. And the resources are just not there. It's weird, isn't it? Because I feel very strongly every day. I've never been this person before on this day. At the age I am, knowing what I know, and I just don't know what I'm doing. And so we're just all muddling along, really, aren't we?
And isn't that a
trying
beautiful perspective
things.
on life?
Yeah.
Isn't life easier if we assume that everybody's trying their best?
Exactly. I do feel like I try and say to myself, everyone is struggling, and I don't know what's going on with people. And generally, it's not about me, which I think is a very useful way of thinking about it. And that if it is about me, it's their choice if they want to tell me or not.
That feels like a really beautiful place to end, actually. I feel like,
Yeah.
Is there anything else pressing that you want to
Could I read you a poem?
I would
Not
love.
one of mine, but I just wanted to read the. This is a very well known poem by American poet Elizabeth Bishop about this idea of loss. So I thought maybe I'll read this.
That sounds like a perfect ending. Thank
It's
you.
called One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing further, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch. And look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster.
Tanya Hirschman, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us this episode. The next episode will drop soon. It'll take one aspect of this one and dig a little deeper into how that might be explored in the therapy room. We call it the B-side. In the meantime, if you'd like to have more of our conversations and metaphorical excavations, it'd be grand for you and grand for us if you would subscribe to the podcast or share a favourite episode with a friend. And one last thing. If you have a metaphor, image or idea that you would like us to explore, then get in touch via our Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to hear from you.